All right. Along with Christina Nastos here at Fashion Revolution USA. And before we start, as you probably heard, this event is being recorded and may be posted on our website and social media. So if you don't want to be recorded, you can always turn off your camera and your mic. Otherwise, honestly, feel free to turn it on. We're hoping that this can be a conversation, and we're just excited to see all of you guys here. And then even though we're virtual, we still want to acknowledge that the ground beneath our feet is historically the home of Indigenous peoples, many of who have been forced to leave for other lands. So please feel free to share the names of those who inhabited these lands before us in the chat. And you could actually use this website. I'll put it in the chat so you can see actually what tribes were historically on your land. So as I mentioned before, I run the Student Ambassador Program along with my colleagues, Christina and Kathleen Grievers. So I'll put all our information in the chat for everyone that's interested in learning more about the program, about us, or if you want to kind of join the Student Ambassador Program. And we're hoping to start our next cycle in September. So we're definitely looking for new people. And then lastly, I'll also drop the link to donate to Fashion Revolution in the chat. These donations help us to run our programs and to continue to contribute to the education of citizens on the issues surrounding the fashion industry. So like I said, I'll post all that in the chat, and I will turn it over to Christina.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kelly. So today we are really excited to introduce the first installment of the Fashion Revolution USA Career Panel. The education team wanted to create this program for our students and community members to bridge the connection between advocacy groups like Fashion Revolution and diverse decision makers across the fashion industry, with the firm belief that employees and organizations want to make holistic, sustainable choices, but might not know where to start. If you're, like Kelly said, if you're interested in becoming a Fashion Revolution ambassador this coming fall, I will also be dropping an interest form in the chat as well. But without further ado, I'd like to pass off to our student ambassador moderator, Tess Stroh, to kick off and introduce our speaker.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you for being here, and thank you so much for letting me be here. I'm very excited to get to introduce and lead a discussion with Kristen Fanarakis, who is the founder and creative director of Senza Fashion. However, before that, she had spent nearly 13 years working on Wall Street, until she went on to launch Senza, which is a classically inspired luxury line for women that's made in Los Angeles. On Wall Street, she worked on the foreign exchange trading desk for such firms as Merrill Lynch and Citibank in New York City. She attended the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and its Keenan Flagler School of Business. And she also holds an MS in International Economics. Currently, she's also working as a policy consultant with the Center for Financial Policy at the University of Maryland in Washington, D.C. And she's the author of a book called The Debutante's Guide to Wall Street, and has written other things for publications such as the Washington Post and the Morning Consult. And then you can find her fashion line on Instagram at Senza Style. And I will hand it over to her to fill in any of those gaps, but thank you so much, Kristen, for being here. And I'm really excited to get to walk through your career and all of that.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled. I've been following, as I posted on Twitter and Instagram earlier today, I've been following Fashion Revolution for a number of years now, and I'm so impressed with the organization, and I think what you do is so important because I think education is key in all of this. I think as someone who works part-time at a university, obviously I think education is important. So I am truly honored to be here today, and I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Right, awesome. So then we can go ahead and get started. But before I start, I just want to let everyone know that we will be taking questions, but we're going to save them and hold them till the end. So if you think of something, make a note of it, and we'll facilitate that for the last 15 minutes. But right now, it's just going to mostly be a conversation between me and Kristen. And I think we'll start with something that I know you are frequently asked about. But I'm sure we are all very curious to hear about your transition from Wall Street to your own fashion line, especially like what inspired that, maybe what pushed you away from Wall Street and had you step back and decide to like start on another course?
So I left Wall Street, and I'll be honest, I didn't really know what I was going to do. And so I went back to business school, because I mean, that's what you go to business school or you go to law school and you don't know what you're going to do. I mean, it's like even when you're older and you're not just getting out of undergrad, that's what we all do. And so, I had, in all seriousness, I had always wanted to get my MBA, but I just never really had time to do it. And the UNC's Keenan Flagler had just launched their online program, and we were the first top 20 school to do that at the time. And so I was like, oh, this is great. I can get my MBA and I can travel and I can take advantage of these things at the same time. And one of the things that an MBA really teaches you is to look at problems as opportunities. And I had been looking to replace a black A-line skirt that I had worn until the fabric had disintegrated and it ripped in a cab when I was getting into a taxi cab. And it literally just, the fabric ripped, not even on a seam, it came apart. And I had been looking to replace that for years and years. And I could not find anything I couldn't find a really nice, well-made basic skirt. And the only thing I could find were from a couple of the really well-known luxury names. And those skirts started at $2,000. And I just felt like that was just too much. I mean, especially at the time, I was a banker. It was like, I could have afforded that if I wanted to, but I was like, but I rode the subway, I worked on the trading desk. And I always tell people, I was like, I really work with animals. It was like, I may have had things thrown at me. So I was not paying that much for a skirt to wear to work. And it just seemed excessive, because I just, it's like, I was an active fashion consumer. So I sort of know, I knew that skirt, 5 or 6 years ago was not quite that expensive. It really, luxury prices really went up significantly after the financial crisis. And you can actually find research. There's significant research out there on this. And so that was the other part that sort of just didn't gel for me. And I was like, what am I paying for? Because the inputs that are going into this are not going up as much as, the end product prices. So the MBA, so sort of fast forward and you get an MBA and you're just like, okay, I can't find a classic skirt. The few that I can find are way overpriced. And this was all around the same time where brands like what you're starting to read about, brands like Warby Parker and Everlane, where they're talking about the models of cutting out the wholesaler. And that's really, and then I was like, oh, this is interesting. And this idea of cutting out the wholesaler and going direct to the consumer as a way of, making a luxury product, basically taking the same product and offering at a cheaper price. Because when you wholesale it, Nordstrom's, Saks, whoever, whatever your end boutique is, they have to make a certain percentage. So whatever, if it costs me, $100 to make something, that store, if I'm going to sell it to Nordstrom has to make a certain percentage. So, you're going to have markups, of multiples versus I can choose exactly how much I want to make, I want to make that. And there are many other reasons. There are a lot, and we can I know we're going to get into it with some of the other questions in terms of going direct. But it really gave me, it gave me control, to go direct. So that's sort of how I ended up in this. And sort of in the macro picture, what I saw was this broader movement away from classic design. And I am if you look at my website, my entire life, it's from growing up watching old movies with my grandmother. I've always worn very classic clothing. Even in high school, I just was not a very, I wasn't super trendy. I would wear a few trendy pieces, but largely very, very, very classic pieces. And that again was becoming harder and harder to find. And so what I saw is that it's again, I opened up that opportunity, and I just saw this sort of broader macro trend. And then you layer that on top of how fast the market was moving. And then as I was starting to flesh out the business plan, that's actually when the Rana Plaza collapse happened. And then that whole event then opened up a whole new can of worms, so to speak. And then I was like, what is going on? Like, and I had no idea how dirty the industry was. And so that I don't know if I ultimately would have launched in some ways if that collapse hadn't have happened, because one of the things that I saw after doing all the research is I saw the broader trend of there needs to be change. And one of the things that I learned, working in foreign exchange, and foreign exchange, you're looking at the 50,000 foot view. You're always looking. I'm always looking at the world from up here, and I saw that it's going to take, and I've been at this for a while, and it's taken, a while to kind of really become become mainstream. As someone who, in 2017 would send pitches out to reporters and they never picked it up when it came to sustainable fashion. And then, a year later that's all anybody's talking about. But so that is sort of how I ended up. That's kind of how I ended up where I was. So it wasn't planned. I love fashion, but it wasn't really in the cards or planned or anything like that.
Right.
Long story. Sorry, long story.
No, yeah. It's great. And I think that's a very unique experience. Speaking for myself, I'm here because I've watched Rana Plaza happen, and it was things like that got me into it in the first place, less than wanting to be part of the industry and then making all of these realizations about what was going on. So it's kind of like a chicken versus eggs thing with sustainable fashion. Like, you're either in it and you notice all of these things that there's problems with, or you notice all the problems and then you want to get into it to sort of deal with them more directly. But I do think it's interesting that you didn't necessarily go to school with this in mind or anything, and the beginning of your career wasn't geared towards this in the first place. So I'm wondering what skills, experiences, what you take from Wall Street to where you are now and from business school, because I'm hoping that some of it has become applicable considering how much time you spent doing that. But I'm very intrigued to hear about it, since it wasn't necessarily all in preparation for where you're at now.
Yeah, running, you're right. Everybody, everybody wants to think that fashion is frilly and fun, but it's a business. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, there's only a portion of it that is creative. So, a lot of it is thinking about, thinking about the business side and thinking strategically, so all of the strategy courses and the analytics and using data and all of that, it's everything. I would say all of that. And I would say being able to look at the news day to day and kind of put that story together. So I would say, I think in some ways it gives me an advantage, because I look at everything from a very different perspective. And even from a design perspective, I am thinking about things. I'm designing for women who are doing the job that I used to do. So I am always thinking about you know, if I'm busy and I have to move and I've got a giant purse and I got to jump into a cab, or, I'm holding on to it, my kid, and I'm, trying to jump in the cab, I'm thinking about different things than probably a lot of other just, I'm thinking about things in a very different way. And so I'm always thinking about things through the lens of, what do I need, or what would I need if I were still living that life, living that life in New York City, what do I need? But pre-COVID, I was still on the road all the time, traveling a lot. So I am designing for, I am designing for myself, in a lot of ways. I mean, I'm not running in and out of cabs every day, but in this, I am still designing for myself. I'm still designing for, for women, or, a lot of women around my age. I would like to say I'm designing for women of all ages, but definitely thinking about all those things. But I think diverse experiences can only add to whatever you're doing, whether you're in fashion or in business, whatever it is. So no, that experience it's every day it's valuable. And I would say every single day.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. So this like different perspective, this more broad framework has put you in a position where you can think about versatility and functionality as well as design and all these different things, which is what has created Senza Tempo, which I read on your website that in Italian that means timeless.
Yes.
And this is something that comes up often when you're just looking at your work, things that you've written, other interviews that you've done, that like classic timeless fashion that you'll want to wear in all of these different ways, and that will keep up with you when you're wearing it so much, is what you were striving for. And that was really heavily influenced by your grandmother. So I wondered if you wanted to talk about that at all, like how you think shopping sustainably is shopping like your grandmother.
Yeah. So sort of, there's actually sort of twofold on the versatility, the kind of the timeless versatility, and then, and then my grandmother. So I, probably my clothing preferences are probably most heavily influenced by my grandmother in every way. I was very close to her growing up. She babysat me all the time. We had Friday night pizza all the time. We would watch old movies, and that was just our thing. And I did this. I went home and did this until I was living in New York City. So this wasn't even just when I was a kid. And so, this was a thing, this is what we always did. And she loved clothes, and she just instilled in me from a very young age to buy the best that you can afford, whatever that is, and take care of it. And if you are trying to buy the best that you can afford and you don't have a lot of money, you have to make it last. So you want to buy things that are going to stay in style. And so this is sort of where it came from, because growing up, I didn't have a lot, we didn't have a lot of money. So if I wanted to buy something, I wanted to buy the nicest thing that I could buy. So I had to buy something that was fair, that was timeless. So it's like, I want to buy a really nice t-shirt. So I'm going to buy, just a simple white t-shirt, or simple, nice, I'm a child of the 80s, Jordache jeans, because those are what's going to stay in style. And so it is instilled in me from just such a young age to just buy the best of whatever that is. And, when I was in high school, it was the Gap. And I wanted, I got a job at the Gap specifically so I could get a discount, so that I could just, at least have a little bit more. I was like, if I have to have a job to pay for my gas money, I was like, at least I can, have something to, pay for clothing as well. But that lesson just never left me. And it's just, as I grew in my career, whatever the best became grew with my career. but the whole timeless aspect never went, that it never went away. And it doesn't really matter what it is. And it's so important, even though, I mean, I make a luxury line because that's the point of view that I have. But I have things in my closet. I have cotton sundresses that are 20 years old that have a bazillion wears and will probably have a bazillion more wears. And they're just simple, well-made cotton sundresses. And it's just, they'll be in style forever. There's just nothing, they're absolutely simple. They're so simple and so well made. And it's old J. Crew, just really, really old J. Crew. And that is just, to me, that is the most sustainable way any of us can shop. It really doesn't matter if you buy something that is well made and you just wear it for as long as possible and as frequently as possible. That is just the best thing. And so that's sort of how that's where the timeless aspect comes through. You had touched on something that made me think about something. So when I left Wall Street, I had traveled for a little while, and this was actually also very formative in how I approach Senza Tempo. I mean, I always bought nice clothes, but I definitely bought too many over the years. And when I left Wall Street, then I was suddenly living out of a suitcase for 2 years. And suddenly you have to pare down your wardrobe to what do I actually need? Because now I'm living out of one large suitcase and one carry-on, and that's it. And and there are times where I'm going from New York to LA. I went and I spent Christmas in Australia. So I'm going across all these time zones, all this weather. And so that's when I really started. I had to look at my wardrobe and so this is why I'm so fixated on versatility with the brand, because I constantly think about, would I have this in my suitcase? If I were traveling again, I always tell people, I was homeless for a couple of years. It's like, if I were homeless again, would I want this? Would this piece be useful? And that's why I'm so fixated on the versatility of items. And so I look at what are the pieces that I wore the most, and this is what, what did I get? I have so many items where probably over those 2 years, I probably wore them hundreds of times just in 2 years, because that's all I had. Those were the only things I had to wear. Mm-hmm. And so it's just like those two things are just so crucial, I think. And I think it gets lost in the green aspect of the sustainable fashion conversation, and that we don't talk enough about longevity. Just if you just keep things as long as possible.
Right, exactly. And I can relate with looking up to a maternal figure. My mom always shopped Gap, she shopped J. Crew, and now my closet is at least 50% her stuff from the 90s, and it holds up.
You're so lucky.
All of this.
You're so lucky.
I'm
so jealous.
Yeah, I love it. And then now everyone's like, where'd you get that? And I'm like, oh, you wish. But and I think it's fun and it's exhilarating to talk about all these things that we do and that we care about as consumers. And then you get to this supplier side where you're at, and I think becomes frustrating and it becomes hard to navigate. And so I'm wondering how the two compare, when you're touting this ideal and these values as a person and as an individual versus as a brand. And you can also talk about the greenwashing as well as that. So language, buzzwords, all of those different things, how when you're creating this cultural shift, do you make it genuine? Do you combat something like greenwashing, as all of these different things become, when you want something to be trendy and this fake facade of it is getting in the way?
Yep. So I try, and if you read our product descriptions, nothing says this is made from sustainable wool or this is made from sustainable cotton. I really steer away from that, because to me, if the wool, what does it mean if it's sustainable wool? I mean, wool is one of the most durable fabrics. There is academic research. I just published a sustainability report that that cites this of academic research about garment lifespan. But we know that wool is one of the most durable, fabrics out there. So that's to me, that's sustainable by default. I don't need to add the adjective of making it sustainable. I think the consumer, the client, they can decide that for themselves. So I don't use that language. I just try to say, give the description. One of the things I do is show the inside of the garment to show them how it's stitched. Because to me, that tells you more about what we're doing than anything I can tell you, than any words that I can tell you. To look at the inside of the garment there's a really wonderful book from, I think it's 1956, from Claire McCardle, and there's a few books I think that are really worthwhile, but there's a book called What Shall I Wear? And Claire McCardle she's really, if anybody doesn't know who she is, she's really the creator of what we know as the American look, even though most people would cite other more famous fashion designers, but Claire McCardle is really, she is the creator. And in this book, she gives you tips on what to look at, what to look at for the seams and things like that. And that's really, really valuable. And so that's what I do. So that's that was a decision that I made, is just to start. And if you follow us on Instagram, I post the insides of garments at least as much as I post the outside. And I talk about the inside, I talk about how things are stitched, all of that, because how the garment is constructed is, to me, that's transparency. And to talk about how it's constructed and to show you, if you can see how clean the stitch lines are, and if you can see there are no threads, if you can see all these things, and again, I post these things all the time. That's green, like, to me. So I don't need to write it. I don't need to qualify it. And so that's how, so I try to stay away from that. And I just sort of try that. It's sort of like if anyone's taken any writing classes, they do the show, don't tell. So I just sort of try to, that's sort of the approach that I've been trying to take in all of this, is to just sort of, to really just try to take an objective stance. And I'm starting to, to really try to incorporate more academic research, to support what we're doing. And as we find that, I'll be, showing that on the website and things like that. So like the garment lifespan, how that overlaps with, with our philosophy. There were many, many aspects that they, that showed how, the things that add to the garment lifespan dovetailed almost perfectly with the philosophy that I had for the brand. And really, the way that I run the brand is really just how fashion used to operate 30 to 50 years ago. I mean, this is one thing I always tell people. I was like, I'm not doing anything revolutionary. I'm not, like, I'm really not. It's really just operating how fashion used to run. I mean, the major luxury houses only used to do 2 collections a year. And the collections were very, 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 very narrow. So that's the other thing. I was like, I'm not reinventing the wheel.
Right. I know. I think the issue is that in that 30-year span, there was like this black hole where all this information and that was getting passed down previously just completely fell off the map. And like something that I've started to notice more and more about clothing is I notice the stitch and I notice the blind hem and everything so much more after having made some clothing myself and done mending and all of that. And that's like kind of that's dying out. Like you'll find very few people my age whose mothers, grandmothers have passed that down to them, like you're considered very lucky
Yeah.
if that's the case. So I think both like that gives you this awareness about clothing, and even stuff like I run a student organization at my school, and I wanted to do a workshop just for people to get their measurements, because I think that's so important, and that's something that we're not all super aware of. Like we're all individuals, you know, and our bodies are all really different. And if you don't like something that can have you have a more lifelong relationship with your clothes is if they fit you
Yes.
well. And there's like, and you don't know how to make that happen if you don't know like what your measurements are.
You are spot on so many, on so many that was in that academic research about fit, about how that helped people, if things fit, people kept the garments longer. And then also mending. And it was like, that was also the ability, they talked about how the ability to mend a garment. So if it was made well enough that you could mend it, that aspect. But I think that you're so right in that if you even if you don't mend it yourself. So I really actually hate sewing because I am not a patient person, even though my mom and my grandmother and my aunt tried my whole life to get me to do it, to teach me patience, and I just don't have it. So I do very little of it. I do very, very little of it. But even just taking things to the tailor, you learn construction. So I know about clothing construction because I took everything to the tailor. So that's how I know everything about everything that I do. So, you know, like I design everything and I work with the pattern maker on construction, and I know construction because everything went to the tailor. And exactly like what you said, when you do those things, you get the appreciation for garment construction and you just understand things. And I think that is so like, it's so crucial. But the measurement thing, somebody actually posted that on Twitter today. They were talking about how, like, you know, why are you ordering clothing that from a cheap place, or that, you know, that, and it doesn't fit you. And, you know, and the measurements thing is so, you know, that it's so true. It's so true. Like people just think one size, and it's like, no, like it's like every size is different or every brand is different on sizing. But yeah, it's so true.
Yeah. And you also talked about like how you are trying to near shore as opposed to offshore, and how you struggle to find local production just with the whole movement away from the US, and therefore like that the loss of that skill set, you know. And then you also talked a little bit about like automating the system versus slowing it down. And I would, just from having looked at your career, think that you would be a proponent of really just slowing things down, because it's hard to automate something. Like it's hard to automate the clothing production and still have it be mendable and high quality and simple and all of that. And really, I'm trying to transition us into this discussion about policy, which that sounds crazy right now, but it's because
it's true.
Automation is really what's been pushed as this solution to environmental issues. It really is to the solution to everything. And so it's hard to get people to listen to you, really, unless you're talking about technological innovation. Like that's what people want to hear these days. And so I'm wondering, like, at the Center for Financial Policy, like what's the conversation, and is it that, and if it is that, are you, like, how are you kind of pushing these ideas about slowness and like, you know, having someone really make your clothing?
So that is not what we focus on, but that is an important part of the conversation, because what that aspect of policy would be related to, so we focus more on regulation related to financial markets specifically. And what you're getting at would be related to, because what you're getting at is actually very, very crucial, because what happened is that there was this, what you said is that you talked about that there was that big leap in time. And in that big leap in time, there were also huge leaps in technology. And the problem is that the US is now behind in a lot because we didn't have the manufacturing. And so now what a lot of the manufacturers, if you're following the conversation with the US manufacturers, what a lot of them are trying to do is build up enough production capacity to make the technological investments worthwhile. This is very different to the work that we're doing, because I'm working in an atelier. We're still doing a lot of stuff by hand. It's different. But a lot of the work that you're talking about happens. So I'm based in Charleston. A lot of that work happens in the Carolinas, and there's a lot of factories. I grew up, just for everybody on the call, I grew up in North Carolina. And one of the reasons I am extremely passionate about domestic manufacturing is I am old enough to remember when NAFTA was signed, and I am old enough to actively remember, and what have watched the state of North Carolina really, go into an active decline, and really just watch all the jobs. If you want to Google a funny video, there was again, most of the people on this call are probably too young to remember. There was a politician called Ross Perot, and he said that he had this quote about how when NAFTA was signed, there would be this giant clicking sound of jobs going south of the border. And unfortunately, NAFTA came, and then the WTO were signed, and that set off this massive string of globalization, and that set off all the offshoring. And I watched all of that, and I was as an undergraduate economics major, and I mentioned I worked at the Gap in high school, and I remember Sara Lee is based in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and I remember the executives coming into the Gap, and they would go around the mall and they would buy the socks and the pantyhose that they made at the factory down the road to quality spot check. And then that factory, I believe, it has been gone for a while. I don't know when, but it always left a mark on me. But the U.S. to catch up, we need that technological innovation, and so I know there are some calling for policy breaks, similar to the way that there are energy credits if you buy an EV car and things like that. That is not something that I am working on, but it is something that I would like to work on, and is something sort of on my radar. I don't know who is working on that in DC, but it is. I have sent out some letters, but I don't know. But it needs to happen. It absolutely needs to happen, because you're absolutely right. Because there's a lot of work that needs to happen. Whereas if you go into my understanding is if you go into a lot of these factories in China, a lot of them are very, very, very technologically advanced, and that needs to happen. So the work that we're doing at the Center for Financial Policy is centered around financial markets. So we're doing a lot more around lately, in particular, disclosures. So disclosures around climate change. That is the big topic this year. If anybody's following anything that's going on with the SEC, I'm not going to bore everybody with all of that, but that is the work. That is the work that we're doing there. I have a very firm belief that capital affects change for better and worse.
Yeah.
And I think that, I think it is a very important, I think it's a worthwhile topic, because I think that it's a way to affect change.
Right. And like broadly. Globalization, people also call attention often to like the financialization of the world, really. So yeah, like that is very potentially impactful, but also difficult work that you're doing. So I really only have time for one more of my questions. and I'm going to choose to ask you about like idealism versus realism. And I heard in an interview that you called yourself a realist, which I was kind of surprised to hear. And I wanted to, I guess, just like ask you about how you stay motivated. Like, is there aspects of idealism in like your personal like practice, all of that, and like really when the real seems to be getting in the way of the ideal, like how do you stay energized? And because fashion, the environment, all of it, it can be, there's tons of hurdles, tons of obstacles, like it's really tiring work. And I'm wondering how, especially as a realist, you keep chasing those goals.
I think, you know, there's a balance. I would say, I guess when I say realist, one of the things that to probably clarify. So I really, one of the things that I sort of loathe in the sustainable fashion conversation is when people will say, well, the best thing that you can do is just not buy anything at all. You know, and it's like, well, if I look at my closet, it's like the clothes that I haven't, I mean, first of all, that assumes that you're frozen in time. So your body changes, your lifestyle changes, nothing changes in time. That is an unrealistic scenario, completely, like completely unrealistic scenario. I also just sort of this idea, there's a lot of brands promoting themselves as perfectly green and perfectly pristine and everything like that. And I think it distracts from the problems. I mean, I think one of the things that we all know, if we're all in this room, we all know that the biggest problem that we have in fashion is overproduction. And the more that you talk about other things rather than talking about the other, just sort of, kind of always, like, it's kind of like when you talk about too many other things that sort of distract from the main problem, like that, like to me, it's like that's how I feel like I'm a realist. I'm like, no, it's like we need to focus on what are the real problems here. And so that's how I was like, so I guess that's probably, I guess that's how I sort of clarify how I'm, not an idealist. It's like, I think I have my feet on the ground in terms of how to approach this. None of us are perfect. No brand is perfect, no matter what they try to tell you. I mean, one of the things, just sitting down, I actually had a call, earlier today with Marilyn, and we were talking about the challenges even for public companies to get their carbon data, to really, it's like to even really get, that data. And you're talking about for public companies with, almost unlimited resources. And so, when you really drill down into the data, that data, a lot of times it's like, it's a regression based on an estimate of revenue, based on revenues. It's not even a real number. So, I just sort of, I think that's how I try to sort of keep the conversation real, is just try to always keep it back to what are the biggest problems in this in this sustainable fashion conversation. Overproduction. How can we get at that? What are the sort of the simplest paths? And just try to, do a little bit better every day. I mean, I think that's the best thing that we can do.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we all could gain from just a little bit better every day being the goal. Like that's so good, even if you're not solving the biggest problem. It's just a little every day.
A little, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But that is all the time that I have to pick your brain. So I will open it to everyone else. And in order to run the Q&A, I'm going to ask that you use the reactions to raise your hand, and then I will call your name and give you the floor to unmute yourself. And if you're unable to do that, then you can pop your question into the chat. But yeah, we'll go ahead and transition into that section of the panel. if anyone has any questions. And if not, then I can continue with mine. But
Don't everyone raise their hands at once.
maybe I can ask another one and then.
Oh, I think Kelly has.
I can just go first. It's
Yeah,
fine.
yeah.
But well, my first thing is a comment, and then I have a question. But I really actually really liked the conversation you guys had about mending and actually and like buying clothes that fit. I don't know why. I always like I realized that my clothes, you know, if the ones that I tend to kind of cycle through often are the ones that like just don't really fit me right. I'm really tall, so I just generally have that issue. So I don't know. I don't know. I really liked that conversation. I actually never really thought about, you know, if I buy clothes, I should probably, you know, actually go and get them tailored. So I will actually wear them more, and I just don't wear them once and then throw them away. I really like that conversation.
No, there's really interesting research on this. And one of the things I try to like keep lines really simple so that it's cheap to tailor. You know, so it's like, you know, it's like a pin, you know, you can kind of just like, you know, make a change here or something. Like I'm actually wearing a sundress today. And like if you want to just take the darts out to make it looser, like you can just take the darts out yourself. Like it's really, you know, it's really simple. You know, this isn't lined, but you know, it makes a huge difference. I'll send you the research, Kelly. But yeah, it makes a huge difference. And just sort of, it's just like it's absolutely fascinating. But yeah, it's like, because once you do that, you realize you're just more comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And then you'll just sort of like wear them. And that was one of the things that I realized when I was living out of a suitcase, is almost everything that I took was tailored, or it just sort of happened to fit me like super well. And it just sort of like, it's almost like I kind of went through and I did an inventory of it's like, why are these my favorite items? And just figured out, like, did like a check the box. So
Yeah.
what are my most favorite things about them? But
and I feel like especially right now with social media and stuff like that, there's a lot of pressure to maybe like fit into a certain size or do this. And I know like I was guilty of that. I would buy something and be like, okay, it's kind of tight. You know, I'll fit into that later. So I mean, there's a lot that goes into this. So yeah, I don't know. I just thought that was a really interesting conversation.
Yeah. It's so true. So it's like, I mean, it's like you get to my generation, like it's so different. Like it's like, you know, it's like that's one of the things. It's like, you know, it's like it's difficult. Like it's, you know, it was like when I was your age, we didn't have social media. We didn't face these challenges. You know, we didn't face these challenges. Like, you know, we're wearing the same things over and over again. Nobody knew, you know, nobody would know. If you had film developed, it could take you years to get film developed. Nobody would see it.
Right. Yeah. My student organization, I like challenged everybody this semester, and we did a rewear challenge where you were supposed to post 5 pictures of yourself with like one same clothing item. And like the outfit could be really different, and it can be like, it's not glaringly obvious, but yeah, just encouraging people to not be shy to rewear and have everyone see it. But I kind of had a piggyback question on the mending conversation.
Oh yeah.
That I had written down, because I think it's interesting how there's this market for it, but it could also exist like in the home, you know, like in that domestic market. And I'm wondering which you think should be, or I guess you don't really have to choose one, but like how do you bolster both, and do they support each other, and just things of that nature?
I think so. I mean, I think that they do support each other. And I think if learning to and having an inclination to do a little bit yourself, like I said, I don't do everything myself because I just don't have the patience to do it. I mean, I hate sewing on buttons. I can sew on a button, but I hate doing it. So I take them to my mom.
Yeah.
It is an ongoing joke that I get to her house and I give her a stack of clothing. And if you actually look at all of my designs, I do not have buttons on them because I do not like to sew on buttons. And so I specifically, like, I'm working on designs for white shirts, and I'm going back and forth with the pattern maker, and she's like, this would be so much easier if we just added a button. And I was like, I know, but no buttons. And so I think that if you learn to do it yourself, you get that appreciation. And there's a couple of books that I like, and I'll post them in the chat after. But there are books from World War II, Make, Do, and Mend, from the like the British like war, like the War Department, and they gave ideas on how to mend things, like how to kind of make, to how to kind of do kind of use things for other ideas. And then there's another book kind of for the same era, Fashion on the Ration. And I think that they coexist together. Because and I will be posting later in the summer. I'll be kind of posting ideas. I'll be posting a bunch of stuff. I'm going to be posting photos of clothing that I've had altered in just sort of kind of ups. Like today we would call it upcycled. I would just call it altered. So like I took a dress and I just no longer, it's a strapless dress that I used to wear to weddings, and I was like, I don't really like strapless dresses anymore. So I had the tailor take it apart and just make the skirt from it. And so it just all sorts of ideas of what you can do. Because I think some people just kind of don't know, and maybe don't have kind of have ideas. And so, but I think once you kind of start and it's like, oh, okay, how can I repurpose this? And so I really do think that if you do it more at home, then at least, it's like, okay, I can't do this. Then it's like, okay, I'll take it to the tailor. Like they can fix this. So it's like, I have some men's shirts and I was trying to fix it and I couldn't fix it. And then, and then she's just like, well, she's like, we can take some of the volume out, and she put darts in the back. And it really, it's a huge oversized men's shirt, but just putting 2 darts in the back, it still looks oversized and it's still roomy, but it just looks a little neater. And it just like, it was a $10 alteration that makes all the difference. And it, it looks so much cuter with a pair of leggings than it did before. And it's just a, really, really simple things, really, really simple things. And it's, you can get to reuse things. It's so important, I think, just finding new ways to do, to use what you have. And I think that if you do it at home, it just gets your mind thinking.
Right. Yeah. It's like easier to like imagine the change and even like verbalize that for the person that you take it to. Like you'll have maybe a better conversation.
Yep. There's a place out in LA, and I think I was like, somebody has their hand raised. There's actually a place out in LA, I know, that does stuff as well. I was like, I can put their name up in the chat. I know it's like if somebody doesn't have a tailor or they don't know what to do, but there's a place in LA that's good about coming up with creative ideas to fix stuff. Like they're going to embroider. I felt like I got a big stain on another men's button down, and so they're going to embroider over the ink because it's all over. It was like, the fabric's too nice to throw away.
Yeah, that's super cool. Also, like I know that's kind of a trend with people like repurposing their wedding dresses, like turning it into something that's more casual and wearable, which is cool. But I think that's really cool, like the idea of like this piece like kind of changing with you as you change and you age and your life changes. That's like kind of beautiful.
Yeah.
Like
we
have about 4 minutes.
Yeah, it's like we have a hand.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
So I want to kind of reverse in the conversation and ask about the comment you made about not maybe kind of oversharing of information from a brand, kind of listing, the different sustainable, quote unquote, sustainable materials they're using, the manufacturing list and all that. What would you say is a better way for brands to market or advertise the focus of sustainability in fashion to either consumers or long-term consumers, and even I think important is the new ones that really are diving in, and maybe learning about those materials could be helpful.
For me, I think just trying to provide information, I think providing information. So don't sit there and just say the material is green, the material is sustainable. So one of the things I do on my website is I define, and I've done this from the beginning, is I define how I think about sustainability. And that's always been outlined on my website. But there's nothing wrong with doing it, but give people information on why it's better. Why this is a better option. Why using polyester, is bad. I think giving people options. I think there's one of the things that I notice is that there's way too many brands that just say this is sustainable wool without any information as to why it's sustainable. It's just sort of it's an adjective without any explanation or any information behind it. And I'm just sort of against the adjective without additional information at this point. Because I think while I'm educated on the topic, I know a lot of customers are not. They don't understand what makes something, more sustainable or not. And so, just calling something green, or calling something sustainable without understanding the why. That's sort of my issue. Is I just kind of like the why, It's kind of like, it's like if I were, it's like, I feel like you're like, you're like, even though I've never been a teacher, it's kind of like, you're back in school, and it's like, well, why? Give me the long answer. And so, does that help?
Yeah, that definitely kind of cleared your message, because I thought you were definitely kind of more on the camp of like, well, no, you shouldn't be saying all these things, but definitely having the why is always the better option. Yes.
Oh, no. I think that everybody should. I think if you're a brand and you're trying to do the right thing, I think you should absolutely be sharing information. But I just think, just kind of calling it green without really, sort of, having information or any sort of research behind it. I was like, I think that's just where it's slippery.
Yeah. Do you think it would be worthwhile to have some sort of certification be introduced to
So I have very mixed feelings about certifications. I talked to I had a conversation with a gentleman who was the head of sustainability at one of the major food companies. One of the major food companies, and he runs a family farm, and his view is that without their government oversight and auditing, that a certification is basically a problem we can't solve. And so I don't, and that is just sort of a personal opinion. I mean, I've looked into a lot of them, and the problem is that often, the methodology is a little bit of a black box. You don't really always understand the data or how it's being, or how it's being certified. That's where, or the customer doesn't even know what it means. And that's really what the bigger problem is. And a customer understands what USDA organic means. Customer understands what non-GMO means. And unfortunately, the education hurdle to get customers to understand, there's already 1 million certifications out there, and I can almost guarantee you none of my customers probably know what any of them mean. I have to look them up half the time, what any of them mean. So that's a certification, they're really only valuable if people really recognize immediately that it has value. To me, again, this is a personal opinion.
Yeah. No, yeah. I think it's definitely like in its current state, like the way they're run now.
Yeah, in its current state.
Preferable, but
Have more
there's still
more oversight.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, all right. I think that we've reached our time. Thank you so much, Kristen, and everyone for being here. It was really, I had so many more questions and there's so much I would still like to talk about, but that was great.
And I just posted the reading list of some of the books that I had talked about, and then to wrap up the think tank that that I work with. We hosted a thing on sustainable fashion. We hosted an event a few weeks ago on what it means to be green, from a policy perspective. And so you can watch that on, if you're interested, you can watch that on YouTube. But thank you so much for having me tonight. This was amazing. I hope to do it again soon. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you, Tess and Kristen. Shout out to you both for an excellent conversation and discussion. Again, so the links to donate to Fashion Revolution is in the chat box below. And also, if you're interested in becoming one of our ambassadors this fall, definitely fill out the Google form. I want to be clear, you do not have to be a student to do so. If you're interested in just being an ambassador and you're a recent grad or you're further into your career, we would love to hear from you. But beyond that, Kelly, do you have anything you want to add before we hop off?
No, that's it. Yeah, all of our links are in the chat. So yeah, feel free to email us, message us on LinkedIn if you have any questions.
Great. Thanks so much, guys.